The Fever have done a good job feeding their fan base, making the people involved available. Stephanie White has obviously spoken on numerous occasions. We've heard from Kelly Crosscup. Now we are hearing from Amber Cox, the GM of the team. She sat down with Pat Boylan, and this was put out by the Indiana Fever. So, they're not going to put all the cards on the table from the official team account and all that. But the Fever social media team has been on point. The way that they've celebrated the players and the kind of things that they've put out into the universe, all that has been on point. But they did at least touch on the free agency that is coming up and the goals in said free agency. Some of it from Cox was very direct, and some of it you can read into and figure out perhaps what their game plan may be. Here is what she said when sitting down with Boylan in regards to that very topic, which to me was the crux of the most interesting part of the conversation.
It'll be an important free agency stretch, perhaps an important trade stretch here coming up. But where do you view this roster right now?
I mean, that getting into the playoffs was such a great step. I think experiencing that for our young team is so important because you understand how the intensity level goes up another several notches, right? So that is a really important step. So obviously we want to take the next step. So I think as we're looking to free agency, we'll think about veterans coming in with that playoff experience. But what a foundation in Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, back-to-back rookies of the year, players playing together that can really do something special for the long term. And obviously, as we get into free agency, the number one priority for us is re-signing Kelsey Mitchell. I think that backcourt was about as lethal as we've seen in the WNBA, and I'm talking maybe in history in the second half of the season last year. So we want to reunite Caitlin and Kelsey. And Kelsey, when I think about her and her time in Indiana, and, a lot of trials and tribulations throughout her career. So for me and for us, I'm most excited for her to be in this moment and experience so much success. Yes, we'll continue to look at the roster, see what's available to us as we get into free agency, and to continue to try to build upon last year's success.
Caitlin specifically has such a unique skill set. She loves to run, just incredible vision. Stephanie White sat down right where you are and said, we want to run. So how much are you thinking about the fit here as you close in on free agency?
It's the most important thing, right? You've got to get the players that fit with the system Stephanie wants to have on the floor. Offensively, we were pretty efficient last year. We need to improve on the defensive end, which I'm sure Steph agrees with. So we'll continue to look at those, 3-and-D type players that can get out and run, but can also get back and help us on the defensive end, really improve on that side of the ball too. But fit is the most important thing. You got to have somebody that can run up and down the floor and catch those passes Caitlin's going to be throwing.
3-and-D. So maybe folks and fans and myself and whoever get a little too caught up in the idea of the big fish in free agency. Not to say that they won't. Not to say that, Satu Sabali or whoever is not on the radar for the Indiana Fever. But to me, it doesn't sound like that is necessarily the only goal or the end-all, be-all for the Indiana Fever when they get out there and test the market. Let's start with the Kelsey Mitchell thing. I mean, it's not the first time the organization has said that, but as authoritatively as she says that, and given what Crosscup has said in the past about the core designation, I just don't see any way that Mitchell is not on the Fever roster. Unless they have a change of heart and decide to trade her, I just don't see it being a reasonable conclusion that she could be anywhere else because all the chips favor Indiana here. Because, one, they could just re-sign her to a contract. They can agree amicably to a contract. Or two, they can core her. She gets the big contract for the short term and she stays. But when they come out and say it, as specifically as they've said it, as often as they've said it, and they have that core in their back pocket, the core of Aaliyah Boston, Caitlin Clark, and Kelsey Mitchell is going to be together next year. Almost a guarantee. As close to a guarantee as there can be. And I loved her saying, the most lethal backcourt perhaps in WNBA history because it really was. It really was. Caitlin setting the table and being able to get her own and Kelsey just being that scorer. I've compared it many times to the likes of a LeBron and a Kyrie, or at this point, a Luka and a Kyrie. But that central engine and hub of the offense, and then the scorer who gets to play off that with the attention not being able to be locked in on them, who's also not really naturally a playmaker, but is more a bucket getter. And the synergy they showed is perfect. And when you talk about speed, no one is faster than Kelsey getting up and down the floor. But that stylistic commitment is also interesting to hear them double and triple down on. Stephanie White has said it before. She even said, in contrast to the Connecticut Sun, they are a faster team. They have better personnel in that regard. The Sun were an older, more veteran team who couldn't get up and down the floor the same way. But Caitlin Clark is a Ferrari. And you're going to see them try to find, I think, personnel who can help them on the defensive end, maybe even get the rebounds, get out and run, right? And that doesn't have to necessarily be the biggest name that's out there on the market. In fact, you could do this through depth too. So there's a lot of different strategies that could become involved here with the Indiana Fever and could come into play in free agency. They're going to have a decent amount of money to play with, right? So I think the way you see it, and she also explained, Temi Fagbenle, how it's tough to lose a player, but that the decision isn't made in a vacuum. And for the good of the expansion of the league, everybody has to make those sort of sacrifices. But I think you see them go into free agency and number one, get Kelsey Mitchell done. And then number two, find the players who they think fit around. And what fits around? Again, defense, speed, shooting. I do think they could use a little size in that regard. So is there a big who can really get up and down the floor? A lot to look at, and you have to go through the free agency list. But I don't think, I guess, long story short, it's not a failure if they go into WNBA free agency and don't land like the billboard name. Maybe they do. Maybe they do both, right? Like that's possible too. They get one more big piece and supplementary pieces. But when you're starting with the foundation is Clark, Boston, Mitchell, and then Hull as that last piece from what we've seen from the previous roster, it isn't that hard to tool around that. That's the hard part to get. The hard part to get is that foundation. And then you build off of that foundation. And the Fever have the best foundation in the league. I don't even think it's close. When you obviously factor in the generational player that is Caitlin Clark, the intelligent player who can, play inside and pass it out and score around the basket with great footwork in Aaliyah Boston, and the bucket getter in Kelsey Mitchell. Just build around that. I mean, it's almost a duh.